We're so excited this evening to have Nathan come on the show to talk to us about his experiences at uni. So welcome, Nathan.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'd love to hear a little bit about what life was like for you growing up before you got diagnosed with dyslexia, and then at what age you were diagnosed with dyslexia.
Yeah, so I was originally born in Ireland and then moved over to the rural New South Wales town of Murwillumbah when I was around 7 years old. And I went to sort of the local primary school there, and where I had been, my mother was very, I guess, had a lot of foresight and got me tested for quite a few things. So I became aware, or my parents at least became aware of my dyslexia from about age 7 when I came to Australia. However, I was struggling enough with coming from overseas and not sort of fitting in with the culture here that I sort of rejected that. So I didn't really myself do anything about my dyslexia. And for that first part, at least, sort of just pushed through with my studies. I always excelled quite a lot in sort of the mathsy kind of side of at least primary school. But I really struggled with my reading, and I was probably a good year or so behind where I should have been in terms of my grade. Going into high school, again, bit of a shift, but beginning to learn the cultural and social norms. So found it an easier transition. And I found that I guess my level of, call it natural intellect, got me through to about year 10. And I sort of got through my subjects in some cases with bare passes. But then once I got to about year 11, I really struggled, and I couldn't get through without support. I found that my dyslexia was really limiting me. And it was about that time that I really got serious about thinking, I want to go to university. So it was at that point that I went and sought help of on my own back. And sort of spoke to my parents and spoke to my teachers, and then got reassessed for my dyslexia. And then was able to use that to help put things into place for me going through my year 11 and year 12, and then on to university. I think in a way, as a sort of a level of escapism through my high school, I really put a lot of time into my music and my creative outlets. And instead of, I guess, paying attention to where I probably should have in a lot of my subjects that I struggled with, which was great fun, but it meant that I didn't necessarily have the growth and the development that I needed in those sort of early mid sort of high school age bracket. And then again, as I got to year 11, it just became so much more difficult. I really sort of had to push a boulder uphill to try and get through that HSC or probably equivalent VCE down here, English in particular, to get me through that next level.
And so was that through tutoring that you had most of that support and competitions in class?
Yeah, so a lot around the provisions. So sort of allowing me to have extra time for my exams, allowing me to have sort of colored filters as we worked slowly over the years, worked out that was something that helped. And then I guess extra time for assessments and that kind of thing. I did a little bit of I guess my parents pushed me into tutoring early on in my high schooling, and I guess in retrospect that was probably to help me compensate for my dyslexia, but I really didn't. It just didn't really work for me, and I didn't. Well, in hindsight, I might have changed my perspective, but I didn't accept sort of, I guess, tutoring help even through year 11 and 12. I sort of felt, the exam provisions were enough.
That's fantastic that you could get those, because sometimes we hear stories that unless you've got a diagnosis from year 7 or year 8, It can be really hard to get those accommodations when you get into your 11 and 12 if you haven't had them before. So it sounds like you had a really good school that you went to.
Yeah, I was very fortunate that they were able to accommodate me in this way, and I definitely acknowledge that. As you say, it was a bit of a challenge. There was some hoops we had to jump through. I had to get a lot of, I guess, written support from not only professionals in the field, but also from several of my teachers and from their learning support department to actually, push that through and to say no, we should give them the provisions. Because as you said, it can be, if you're not diagnosed early, it can make it quite challenging to get it at that stage. I guess, I was just extremely fortunate that I was able to make that work, and that they were able to look out for me in that way and help me through that.
Very sad you had to jump through so many hoops though.
Yeah.
Try and get the support you needed. It's really disappointing, but it's really positive to hear that you got that support. But also it's interesting how you say you spend a lot of time in music and the arts and being creative rather than focusing so much on school. But I think, it's great to see some of those strengths that you were playing to while you were at school. I think it's really important for young people to be able to see the challenges, but also the strengths that they have that they can work to and that they enjoy, because sometimes we lose that joy if we're stuck in school and we're struggling all the time. So I think it's really important for young people to hear that message as well. And then you successfully passed year 11 and 12 and got into university. So congratulations. What a journey for you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It was indeed that journey. It was interesting. I remember halfway through year 12, my parents, or my mother specifically, sitting me down and having a conversation with me about, look, if you don't pass here, what are your options? Because we weren't sure if I would make the cutoff for what I was looking to go into. So fortunately, yes, I managed to get the marks I needed to get into the degree I wanted. But I think it really took I should say it both took a shift of mind in that last sort of, I guess, 6 months leading up to my final exams. But also I had a lot of support from family, friends who around that time, due to a variety of reasons. I was living on my own through year 11 and 12. And then family, friends took me in for that last six months and sort of really looked after me. And that, I think, really helped me to have that extra level of discipline and support to just focus in on exams and sort of, I guess, have that perspective of, look, it's hard, but it's only 6 months, and it opens a lot of doors to that next stage.
I think it's really interesting you use the term shift in mind or mind shift, because I think sometimes it's really hard for us to be able to shift into that positive frame of mind, to think this is all right, I'm focusing in and I'm really going to put everything into it. So congratulations again. And so please, what did you get into at university?
So I got into a master's, I first got into my Bachelor of Science, majoring in mechatronic systems, and then went into a Master's of Mechatronic Engineering. So essentially it was a 5-year robotic engineering degree.
Wow. So that math that you were really good at in primary school clearly continued throughout secondary school. Well,
the maths, I guess, got me through. Interestingly, maths was one of my weaker subjects in high school. I ended up actually repeating. I did well enough to pass, but my teachers convinced me to repeat one of my maths units to get a higher mark to get into uni, which I ended up doing. And I did actually struggle with a lot of the sort of pure maths kind of subjects like calculus and linear algebra in university. But I found that I really excelled at sort of the more applied mathematics. So how it actually applied to engineering and sort of physical systems. So I, admittedly, for my first year or so, I had a few scrape passes, perhaps a few pity marks to get me over the line. But once I started getting past that sort of fundamentals and into the more specifics, I really felt that I started to excel. And then I think once I got into my master's degree, it's sort of, I had another mental shift that, of sort of the goal that I looked to try and graduate with, and then just really honed everything into my studies and putting as much effort into those as I could. And ultimately that paid off in the end.
I'm always very jealous when I hear of people that are dyslexic and they've got these amazing math skills, or it's something that they're really good at, because for me it's just a foreign language, and I have been about grade 6, I think. So I always think, it's nice to hear people have that skill, but it definitely wasn't one that was passed down to me. But what helped you survive university? Because that course must have been so hard for you in lots of different ways. So how did you manage to get through?
So it was, I guess, a combination of things, but very similar to high school. So a family friend of ours sort of pointed me towards the student services area of the university. And in my first 2 weeks of arriving at uni, I went to them and just said, look, here's what I have. I have dyslexia. These are the particular areas that affect me. What can we do to help me through the course? I was really fortunate that, I had someone who sat down with me, and we looked at it in quite detail and looked at what provisions they were able to give me, what they can't give me. And they basically said, look, as we go along, test these for a year, see how they go. If we need to revise them, we'll look at that next year. So I got, I guess, similar again to my high schooling, I had extra time for my exams. I was able to have extensions for a lot of my assessments. They have the colored filters. And that worked. Again, I found that there was a level to which that could get me until I met roadblocks. So as I got into my third year of university, I found myself getting towards another roadblock and had to go back to them and sort of said, look, I'm really struggling with this. Is there a way I could, say, get more time or something like that? And they basically, what they said to me was like, look, we can't give you more time, but there's a couple of other things we could do. So I was able to get my exam done in an individual sort of like pod or room, which meant that for me, my dyslexia is really bad when I'm, I guess, trying to process the information. So if I have a lot of distractions, it really, I really struggle with trying to sort of, I guess, block things out and think straightforward. So getting that private room really made a difference. And then they also allowed me to have food in my exams, which may not seem like particularly related to dyslexia, but because it took so much more brain power to actually work and to actually solve the problems, I found myself unable to think by about an hour and a half to 2 hours into my exam. So by allowing me to bring in something as simple as a banana, I was able to have that little bit of a sugar hit halfway through that would give me the energy I needed to push through, particularly my 3-hour exams, which after you applied extra time, sometimes went out to 3.5, 4 hours. So being able to have that sort of level of accommodation as I went through my degree and be able to step things up and sort of have that trial and error really helped me be able to get through the course. And my lecturers were always very receptive when I would, I'd just shoot them an email and be like, hey, I'm struggling to get this assignment to you on time because of, it requires a lot of reading, or say it's a coding assignment, and obviously you're reading a lot of lines of code and trying to process what's happening. I would shoot them an email and just be like, hey, I've spoken to the services department. Here's my alternate arrangements. Can I have an extension of 2 weeks? And that really got me through the whole process. And it was nice because it was also very, with the exception of doing my exams in a different room, it was, no one knew. None of my friends knew about it. None of my lecturers didn't really know unless I told them. So there wasn't, I guess, the level of, I guess, embarrassment that sometimes you can feel getting these extra provisions, or at least I found when I was younger. By the time I got to probably my third year of uni, I didn't really care who knew, who didn't. I really embraced it. But particularly in those first couple of years, it was nice to just have that level of, or I guess that separation, to be able to be, I guess, socially normal with everyone around me. I guess lending back to that, coming from a different country and trying to fit in. I really wanted to try and fit in with my peer group once I got to uni. So that was nice to have that little bit of separation as well.
And so there's two questions, so I don't forget. One is, what were the barriers that you were facing? But also, now I think I've forgotten. But also, what was the turning point for you in being comfortable in disclosing your dyslexia to your peers?
Yeah, so I guess.
Topic.
Sorry?
That's a really important topic for our listeners to hear, the reasons why you didn't, but also what shifted your thinking around it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think two parts. One, I became a lot more aware of some of the, I guess, benefits, or I guess the perks that sometimes come with dyslexia. Like, we may not necessarily be able to read or write as well, but that often is translated into other benefits that we have over, say, someone who doesn't have dyslexia. And for me, I found that was definitely in creativity, and also in a level of entrepreneurship as well. And I guess I really embraced that, and so I can prove that I can do what the other people can do, but I can also do a lot of the creative stuff. Yes, I might need a little bit of help to do the normal, but I'm still able to be who I am, and to be able to do all of these great things. And I guess it gave me that level of confidence to have faith in my dyslexia, and to be quite open and proud with my dyslexia. I started to actually, it'd be a pretty open thing that I would say to people, oh, look, I'm dyslexic, or and I think also, as the more I spoke it, or the more I said it, the easier it became to sort of identify with that. And I guess the second part was I stopped drinking alcohol at the end of my first year. So, which is, a strange thing for a young person in college to do. But when my mother passed away, I decided to give up the drink. And that in itself is such a strange thing to do in Australian society, that kind of put it into perspective, that I was going to get shunned more for that than I was for being dyslexic. So I might as well embrace being dyslexic.
That's a whole different topic we could talk about.
Yeah, indeed. But
Australian attitudes to when people don't drink. It's a fascinating area.
Yeah, very much so. But yeah, so those are probably the two of the things that really sort of, I guess, helped me to come through with and be open with my dyslexia. And I think having those sort of creative outlets earlier in life, and doing theatre and those sorts of things, gave me a little bit of the confidence to sort of put that outward persona, and to, I guess, sort of try and embrace whatever challenges I'm working with.
Thank you for sharing that. It's really important to hear that side of people's stories, and I think it will be really valuable for the young people, or for anyone really that watches this interview. So thank you. Going back to you said that there are at times barriers which then led you to go back into getting some additional support. What were the type of barriers that you were coming up with where you thought you needed extra help?
So the main barrier I was coming up against was not being able to finish exams. So there was a certain subset of exams that around I can't remember if it was my last semester of second year or my first semester of third year, but I got to a point where I was consistently not being able to finish an exam and needed extra time. And it was at that point where I guess at first I was just thinking, have I just reached my limit? Am I just not smart enough? Or is there something else limiting me? Is this part of my dyslexia? And I guess I'd also found my dyslexia. I guess through those first couple of years, I began to take a bit more notice where my dyslexia was impacting me, and looking at previously where I just wiped off and was like, oh, I'm just not good at that. I would look at it in a little bit more depth and say, okay, these are specific areas and ways that my dyslexia is impacting it. For instance, like reading or certain aspects of reading or processing information. And as I became more aware of that, I think I then came to the conclusion that perhaps the struggles I was having with those exams was actually more down to my dyslexia than anything else. And as I mentioned, I guess the running out of energy as well towards the end because of the level of processing, I guess, extra overrunning my brain needed to do to compensate for the dyslexia, particularly at those sort of, I guess, higher level subjects that took a lot more comprehension and brain processing. So yeah, that was probably the main one that I then went to student services again and just sort of began that conversation sort of with, this is the issue. What can we do about it? Is there any additional support I can access?
It's really interesting that you say, had I reached my limit and I wasn't smart enough? And because at the foundation, we always talk about if people have the right accommodations in place, then, you should be able to achieve what you're wanting to achieve. And this is a prime example of, questioning your ability, but once you had those accommodations in place, being able to succeed. So I'm really pleased that you mentioned that so we can help continue to promote that message of how important it is to get accommodations, because they do help so much for people.
Yeah, no, they really do, and it's interesting because after I had those accommodations, those extra accommodations, and after I guess I had that sort of, I guess I had another shift as well, sort of going into at the beginning of my master's. So I got my extra accommodations in third year. I got my through third year, and then I had another sort of shift of, okay, no, I actually want to do really well at these subjects for my master's. I remember in my undergrad thinking, I get low marks, I get passes get degrees. Passes will get me through on these sort of more mathematically heavy subjects, or sort of more detailed subjects, and that's all I can do. And then once I had that shift and those extra supports in my master's, those same sort of subjects, to be honest, actually a lot harder technically, I went from getting passes to getting HDs, because I had, as you said, had that extra, the provisions I needed. And again, that mental shift, that determination that, no, I am going to do this. I'm going to embrace my limitations, and work with them rather than fighting against them to try and get through to get the result I needed. And in many cases, that meant I had to study harder or work longer hours to compensate, but it meant that I could still get that result. It just took a slightly different path up the mountain.
I wonder if I had known I was dyslexic when I did my undergrad, I would have got more than just Ds, because I would have had accommodations. And in my master's, I got a lot less Ds, I must say, than I did in my undergrad. But it can make a world of difference, can't it, when you get that additional support. But it's really interesting how you keep coming back to that changing of mindset as well. And I think that's a really important message for people to hear, that it's a combination of things that enable us to achieve. And I think it really is that mindset shift, as well as the accommodations and support that we have. So you graduated, it was a year ago now or 2 years ago?
Halfway through last year.
Halfway through last year.
Actually, sorry, I'll just touch on that because it made me remember. The other thing I did with that was a huge help with my studies, was when I started, I was doing 4 subjects a semester, which is a full load. Then due to a couple of unforeseen family circumstances, I had to take a three subject semester and then make up for that in summer. Now, what I found with that was I performed better in those three subject semesters. So for my master's, the other big thing I did was I decided to, instead of doing it in 2 years, to do it in 2.5 and just do a three subject load for most of my semesters. And that really took the pressure, that extra bit of pressure off, and allowed me to actually focus in detail on each of the subjects. So yeah, that was probably one of the other biggest sort of impacts to me being able to like manage the more complex and harder subjects.
Strategy. So did you work with the disability support services to help reduce your workload so you could manage it better, or was that just with your course coordinator? How were you able to do that?
So the university allowed you to I guess, select however many subjects you wanted to take per semester. If you had less than 3, you were considered part-time, but 3 or 4 was still considered a full-time study load. And to get government benefits of Centrelink, I needed to maintain a full-time study load. So I was able to get away with that three subjects. And it was more, I guess, of my own noticing what I needed and how much better I performed and how much less stressed I was doing those 3 subject semesters in undergrad. That sort of made me make that decision that, I'm going to get better marks, I'm going to be less stressed, and I'm going to be able to ultimately just have much higher levels of success if I do my master's over a slightly longer period of time.
Yeah, that is a great suggestion. Thanks for mentioning that. I think it's really important for people to realise that you don't have to cram it all in to try and get to the finish line faster, that sometimes taking that bit of extra time can really help with what you're trying to achieve overall. So you graduated last year then, if I've got my maths right?
Yeah, middle of the pandemic.
Well, because we were talking before how you did the last part online. Do you want to mention anything about that before we talk about graduation? Because you shifted from face-to-face to online, which would have been challenging.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some parts of it were challenging, and some parts of it were actually better. So for one of the subjects I was doing was just a standard sort of coding subject. And what I found was, so for the first, I don't know, 2 weeks, I can't remember how long it was, we had the in-person lectures, and that was, the standard sort of, you sit there, someone presents to you for an hour block, you write down everything you can and pretend like you paid attention and remembered everything. But what they did for online for this subject was, instead of just recording a lecture and making us watch it, which a lot of the other subjects did, they decided to present the material in small modules, which was a series, like a lot of little videos that were, say, anything from 3 to 10 minutes long each. And I found that was absolutely game-changing for how I was able to absorb the information and to actually process and understand it. Because I could just do it in small little bite-sized chunks, make sure I understood this little concept, and then I could go on to the next video. It was a bit like how you watch YouTube videos and then just like you get addicted to the next one and the next one. You just want to keep, it brought back that eagerness to learn rather than just paying attention to a lecturer because you have to. And as a result, I got much better marks in the subject than I had in sort of, I guess, comparable subjects in the past. So from that respect, and because my lecturer had the foresight and the dedication to present the material in that way, I found that lockdown was really good or online learning was really good for that sort of subject. Now, my other 2 subjects were practical based. So they were an internship, which ended up being all remote, which meant lots of report writing and research. And that was quite difficult. I remember I think I had something like 150 citations of research papers I'd had to go through. at the end of my report. So it was challenging from the dyslexia point of view, trying to process and read that information. But obviously you'd have to do that in other subjects or similar stuff in any form of research. It's not exclusively online, but having specifically chosen a practical subject and then being sort of, I guess, having it shifted and pigeonholed into something that was much more written and theoretical really did make it quite challenging for that last semester to get through that from a dyslexia point of view.
So did you read all those papers, or did you use the technology to listen? Were there any certain strategies you used to help you manage that workload?
So I don't really use a lot of technologies. I found for me personally that just the way my brain works, they didn't really work with me. So earlier in my sort of earlier education, we tried a couple of things like voice dictation for typing stuff, and I found that I couldn't process what I was trying to say quick enough before I actually say it and have to write things out. I much preferred pen and paper. And then again, in terms of reading, I love videos, and I love consuming audio visual content. And ironically, I really enjoy podcasts as well, but I never really found absorbing boring or research text via audio any better. So I would say my main thing with the research papers was I would just skim read for the, I guess, key points that I was looking for, look at the diagrams, and then if I needed more information than that, go back and sort of use those other sort of guide points to get the type bits of information out that I required. The other thing I found really helpful, and I guess the one sort of, I guess, technology aid in a way was I use unfortunately, I have got myself an iPad for my master's, and I use that a lot with the research because it would allow me to download in documents, do all my highlighting, put a colored filter over it, and annotate in quite a graphical way. Because I definitely see shapes and pictures much easier than I see text. So that really has helped me sort of portray the data, in a way that was much easier, or even just like, say, cutting out a paragraph so I could just focus on reading that rather than having, this huge body of black and white hard contrast text to try and process.
There are great strategies, thank you, and some that I might try. I'm trying to read my research papers for uni as well. So we were starting before about the fact that you're now employed, and how has that gone for you transitioning from graduating into the workplace now?
So it's interesting. I'm still in a bit of limbo. So I decided to take 6 months off after I graduated. Just sort of because I never took a gap year or anything like that. I just wanted, and it was mid-pandemic, so jobs is not exactly the easiest thing to focus on when you're in lockdown. But what I guess I come to through that was I really enjoyed having the self-direction, and I worked on a lot of projects myself during that time. I wasn't just sort of sitting around playing video games. I was quite active, and I started sort of a small e-commerce business, sort of manufacturing stuff myself and selling it online and that kind of thing. And what I really found was I enjoy working for myself and trying to make an income that is I'm not compensated for my time, but I'm compensated for my results. So that's kind of I'm now working with the university. I'm back helping them adapt some of their practical courses to sort of a post-COVID kind of world. But that's the way that sort of contract's been set up, is it's very much being rewarded for what I deliver for the university rather than strictly paid for my time. And I guess I was fortunate that through my degree, I had several opportunities with employment with between internships and formal jobs in various roles that I guess I got a feeling for what I liked and what I didn't. And I was fortunately had the freedom in those jobs to be able to, I guess, move towards areas of strength where I could show, I guess, more of a focus on creativity and innovation and practically doing things rather than the report writing and the technical details. But even in what I'm doing now, the university, I have to write a manual for a whole heap of this stuff, and that for me is something that I've only just started. But I dread sort of going through it because it's again so much text-based information. But I find for me that by sort of breaking it up into little chunks, and I found this with all of my work when I've had to do more written stuff, is just breaking it up into little dot points and going, okay, let's execute on this, and then leave it, come back to next dot point, execute on this, and sort of subdividing everything. It really sort of helps me plod and plow through that. But the people who I work with, they don't know I'm dyslexic. I don't think they well, actually, some of them do because I just haven't told them. But like it was never a part of my employment process or contract or anything. They couldn't care less. And same with my previous employers as well. As long as I was able to do my job, they didn't care whether I was dyslexic or not, or missing a limb. Like they were able to accommodate me for me and the I guess pace that I was able to do my work in.
That's fantastic to hear. You've got such a great work environment and that you've been able to transition to something that sounds like you're really enjoying and you're working to your strengths. And there are a lot of dyslexic entrepreneurs out there. So it sounds like you're heading into that field as well. So before we open up to any questions, are there any key strategies or thoughts that you'd like to leave with people that are returning to TAFE or university this year that you think might help them?
I guess the biggest thing is just there's no shame at all in seeking help through the studies. And it was interesting, my learning support person put it to me that it's not about giving you a leg up, it's about evening the playing field, and allowing you to have the same opportunity as anyone else. And I know I really struggled with that in my high school. As I said, it took me till year 11 before I cracked and was like, I need the help. But once I did, it really helped me, and I realized that no one actually cared if I was dyslexic or not. Like my peers didn't change. The staff didn't look at me any different in any ways. They sort of helped me through it a bit more. And then of course in university, you find yourself surrounded by honestly hundreds of other people who are getting some support for something. You've got people with all manners of capabilities and their different struggles, and you just join that community of people who are trying to get through the same course that you are. And there's absolutely nothing you're not on your own, and there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of actually reaching out and trying to find what's going to help to get you to reaching your potential. Really important messages
for our listeners. So thank you for sharing those with us tonight. I've had some questions coming through, or people that would like to ask some questions. So are you happy to take a few questions, Nathan, before we wrap up?
Certainly.
Judith, would you like to ask your question?
Certainly. Can I just very quickly say that you've got all the qualities that make a successful dyslexic. You're not afraid to advocate for yourself, and I think that self-advocation is so important. And you've got it sussed. You absolutely have got it sussed. There's so many dyslexic young people who recoil from actually making that step forward and asking for the support. And it is such an easy thing to get and such an easy thing for educators to do, that if people don't ask, it just stays hidden and makes it more difficult for other people sort of further down the line. So you've really are an inspiration, absolutely. But my question was there anybody else in your family that was dyslexic, or were you the first, or is there a relative somewhere that's also dyslexic, not necessarily diagnosed, but that you know is dyslexic?
Yeah, so my half-siblings, two of my half-siblings are dyslexic. And but we believe, my father was never diagnosed, but we knew that he was always slow at reading and writing, and I have my suspicions that that he was also dyslexic. My mother's side definitely was not, but I feel that strongly through my father's side of the family that there's a history of dyslexia. They're quite likely.
Yes. It frequently gets diagnosed in adult parents when their child is diagnosed, and things begin to make sense from their perspective. So it's not unusual. Okay, thank you.
When my dad found out he was dyslexic through me, he wanted myself, him and my brother branded with a tattoo that he'd designed. That we were all dyslexic. And he figured it out at, I think, 65 when he realised that he was dyslexic. It's very strong on my dad's side as well, but he's not diagnosed. But I'll never forget him sending me this picture saying, I think we should all get this tattoo. I was like, oh my God, no, Dad, we're not being branded.
That's terrible. Oh, dear.
Is there anybody else that would like to ask Nathan a question before we wrap up this fantastic interview? Chrissy?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And it took me back to when I went to Teachers College and undiagnosed with dyslexia. And although I worked really long hours, and I'm guessing that you did too, to manage to plough through the work. At the end of the day, where did you kind of come out in scores for your subjects?
So I would say my first year and second year, I really struggled, and I think I still was sort of working out, how study works and that kind of thing. And so I had a mixture of sort of bare passes in the hard subjects, and then I would get a mixture of distinctions and high distinctions in some of my more I guess interesting subjects. But by the time I got through my master's and I really sort of made that decision to get the higher mark, or the marks that I wanted, like my last 2 semesters were all straight HDs, and then I came out, I think, with a 74 WAM, which is distinction for Melbourne Uni. So I had a pretty low WAM at the end of my undergrad. I sort of still tried to find the nuts and bolts and work out how to compensate for this. But once I had, as I've mentioned a few times, once I've had that mental shift that, I want to do this and I want to do this properly, and I've got to put in whatever I need to get there, and to really embrace this head on. Once I did that, I powered through, and I just started seeing results that I never thought was possible. In complete honesty, I looked at my undergrad scores and I thought, okay, this type of math subject or whatever, the best I can do is maybe a 70, probably a 65. And, I'll be really happy with that. And then to be able to, in my last year, be able to see high distinctions in those subjects, those sorts of subjects, really, I think surprised me, but also filled me with a lot of pride that, what I'd chosen to do and the strategies I'd chosen to implement really did work, and that it was possible to get those sorts of marks, coming from being dyslexic. I think, yeah. So yes, sorry to answer long-winded answer to your question, but I did quite well in the end. So
I know that the very first written assessment I had to do, I worked incredibly hard, and I had no idea what good academic work looked like because I didn't finish year 9 and hadn't read prior to going to Teachers College. So I do recall when I got my very first assessment back that I was stunned and shattered because I'd worked terribly hard, and I'd got an H, and I went A, B, C, D, E's a fail, F, G, H. Why would they go that low? And the tears flooded down my face. And I was, a 25-year-old woman, which felt incredibly old, with all of these young 17, 18-year-old somethings. And the lecturer came past and it was gushing out of my face, the tears. And he said, "What's wrong?" And I just showed him my mark. And I said to him, "Why didn't you stop at F? Why did you have to go that low?" And he said, "Look, I'm terribly sorry, but honours is the highest we go."
Oh,
So I had no idea what a good piece of work looked like. So the pride that you must have had in building and building and building your scores up must have been just phenomenal.
it was very much like that. I guess not having a real reference for what a good score actually looked like. I remember thinking in those like parts of my undergrad, sort of like, what am I doing wrong? What does the smart kid score look like? Paper look like? What are they putting on that piece of paper that is so golden? And also, as I said, it ultimately just took a bit of work and sort of strategies for how to manage my sort of time box my time and refine and become more concise in my answers, and ultimately just find ways of study that made me more effective when it came to an exam.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we've gone way over time, Nathan. Thank you for giving us so much of your time. It's been so generous of you, and your story is just so inspiring on so many levels. And I think the messages you've spoken about tonight are just so important to reinforce for young people, but anyone that's returning to uni or is trying to attempt higher education. I think it's really going to inspire and encourage them. So thank you so much. Were there any other questions before we wrap up our fantastic interview this evening?
Just thank you very much, Nathan.
Well, thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak with you all this evening.